I'm going to call the second meeting of the Corporate Service Committee to order. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. And to make the request for any city services, please contact accessibility@london.ca, or you can call 519-661-2489, extension 2425. And to make a request for this specific meeting, please contact csc@london.ca. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. Is there any item that we'd like to pull apart, or should we move it together? Councillor Helm.
Can we pull 2.1, the demolitions?
We'll just separate them. So we'll put 2.1 on the floor first.
Chair? May I move the balance of the consent agenda?
Sure, we can actually move 2.2, moved by Mayor Holder. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hopkins. And we'll call it to question, and we'll come back to 2.1 after. Sorry, before we call it to question, are there any comments or discussions? Councillor Van Holst.
Sure. So once again, I'd like to thank our representatives on the FCM and commend them for doing a great job of advocating prior to the election. So making sure that our priorities are known, they show up in campaign promises, and now they can hold people accountable. So I think that's a great strategy and was well executed. So thanks.
Any other comments or questions? No. Okay. Mayor Holder? No. All right, we'll call it to question.
Chair, I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, and the motion's passed 6-0.
Now I'll put the item 2.1 on the floor, and we'll start with the discussion, and then we can look for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Helmer.
Okay, I'm just looking for some comments from our staff on this one. I understand sort of what's being recommended. I think it makes sense, but I want to make sure that there's no real other option, because one of the properties seems to be in not a great shape. The other one seems to be like it could be rented if this construction project wasn't happening. And I just want to make sure we're not missing an opportunity. First of all, that the sewer project has to go now, and that it couldn't be delayed to be aligned better with the construction on rapid transit. I imagine the answers are all, yeah, we already looked at that, but I just want to check on it before going ahead with demolition, especially for 74 Wellington, which seems to be a perfectly fine house.
If I may, Madam Chair, yes, the project does have to go now. We need to get some of these complementary works done in advance of moving forward on the rapid transit line. In many ways, we're fortunate that we're actually able to have this opportunity, as much as I don't like to see housing stock not available in the meantime, because we do need to fully close Watson. We're going to have to work very closely with residents to provide them access on foot, and this at least allows some place for them to park, and so that they're not actually stuck within their homes. We have looked at a number of different alternatives in terms of construction, staging, and access, and just given the width of the street and the depth of the project, there really isn't an alternative.
Councillor Helmer.
Well, I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, moved by Councillor Helmer. Is there a seconder? Mayor Holder. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. These two properties in my ward, and I just wanted to give acknowledgement to the previous owners of 74. As Deputy Mayor Helmer pointed out, this is actually a nice property. They put a lot of effort into fixing that up. I think it was Alchemy Junk Removal had that for a little while, and they did a great job, and there's obviously some pride of ownership there. That's the kind of thing that's great to see throughout the city. So it's unfortunate that it has to come down, but of course, once the improvements are done to Watson Street and Wellington Street, we can redevelop this, and I'll just ask through through the chair to staff if that would be the intention then, is to make those properties, which are fairly deep, available for development once again, or will that likely remain as a parking lot for some reason?
Through Madam Chair, no, the intent is for longer range planning that the sites that are available after construction, we would look at assembly of lands for repurposing for higher and better use, so they wouldn't be maintained for parking lots, and they would be exposed to the market for redevelopment within the provisions of the London Plan.
Okay, and I think, and I'd like to point out that with respect to the BRT project, there was some, I think, comment in the media about us not realizing that money would be required to purchase properties, although I had thought, and some of the other councillors had realized that long ago. And I think this purchasing properties and then allowing them to be conglomerated and used for a better purpose is an opportunity for us as well. So we won't be losing money along this corridor. We'll just see improvements to both the road and the properties. So that's a good, that's a positive for in both cases.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so it's been moved by Councillor Helmer and seconded by Mayor Holder, and we'll call to question.
Closing the vote, and the motion's passed 6-0.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me. I didn't realize that by moving the consent agenda item that I didn't have the opportunity then to give a shout out to Councillor Morgan and his work, particularly with respect to FCM. And I know both Councillor Morgan and Councillor Hopkins, both of this committee, do tremendous work. So with a little bit of extension of allowance from you, Chair, I just want to say thank you to them for their hard work with the FCM, and to Councillor Morgan and Councillor Hopkins for putting this report forward. I think it's superb, and I look forward to seeing who the next FCM president is as a result of the retirement of Bill Karsten. So on that note, thank you to our representatives on FCM, through you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. The sentiments are shared across the committee. So there are no scheduled items. So we're going to move to items for direction, which is 4.1, issuance of proclamation policy. Councillor Helmer.
Sure, so I see the recommendation is that the report be received, but there's sort of the language there if we wanted to go ahead. So I'm happy to move the option, which is to proceed. There is some suggestion there that it be on a pilot basis. I'm not sure if that's necessary, but I'm not really closed off to the idea either. I think with everything, when we make a change, we want to see if it works and then make adjustments if it's not working, right? So I'm happy to move ahead with the process that's recommended in the appendix, essentially, and have that forwarded to council for discussion.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'm of the opinion that another way forward might be superior. We can do a pilot in an expensive way or in an inexpensive way. And I think were we to simply suspend our council policy and provide the requested proclamations, we would have an opportunity to see if they actually have the beneficial effects that were requested without the cost and the potential risk as well. I think if we did have a policy, I would like to see that it's one that avoids a duplication of error in the various levels of government. So if there's a proclamation, seems to me it only really needs to be one of municipal or provincial or federal to have all levels of government proclaiming the same thing. Seems like we're wasting taxpayers' money. So my preference in this, and we'll see how the rest of the committee weighs in on it, would be to simply suspend our policy and give the requested proclamations and see how that works out.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I am supportive of the pilot project. I think when we had this last discussion at corporate, we talked about reviewing Toronto's policies, and I think it's safe to say through this report that both Toronto and Brampton are reviewing their policies, so we need a little bit of time, and the pilot project will allow us to have that time to see how things work. Having a procedure in place, to me, is important because it gives us some guidance and some opportunities, and it is a pilot project. We'll see how this unfolds, how the costs and the demands and the interpretations of our policies will take effect is something that I'm looking forward to seeing how we move through this. I think it's really important that we are looking at this. If anything, to me, it's how we build a better community for everybody, and this is something that allows us to look at it and have a procedure, a policy in place, and supportive.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. The first is with respect to the potential costs and staffing implications. In the report, I know it outlines that we could do this on a one-year pilot basis, and then we would have a better understanding about what those costs and resources are. And is the intention to do those within existing resources in the first year if we proceeded with a pilot, and then bring forward that information once the pilot is complete?
Madam Chair, there doesn't seem to be any alternative to that approach for the present. I think the clerk estimated that it would take about a half staff person time for the first year, and we're approaching it on that basis, and we intend to cover that through the existing budget.
My second question is, with respect to the motion, I know Deputy Mayor Helmer said that he was happy to put it forward as articulated. I heard Councillor Hopkins say she supported a pilot. I'd like some clarity on, is the intention here to approve this completely, or is the intention with this particular motion to actually run the pilot model as is articulated in the report?
The staff recommendations suggested that the council might wish to proceed on the basis of a one-year pilot. And from my perspective, the benefit of that would be to allow us to come back to you with a report on our experience during that year, letting you know what the costs were and of any changes that would be desirable going forward, including anything that we've learned as a result of additional communications with Toronto and Ottawa. So, you know, it doesn't matter really whether what the policy says in terms of the pilot project, but I think we would appreciate having the direction from you to report back after a year with that information.
So I appreciate those answers, and I would be supportive of that particular approach as it's outlined. So I would look to Deputy Mayor Helmer to see if he's willing to provide that direction in his motion, and should that be the case, I'd be happy to support this as well.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes, I think, as I said earlier, and I thank Councillor Morgan for just wanting to clarify it, I do think it's useful to have a review of these kind of things, and generally all kinds of policy changes. So having a review after 1 year, I think, makes a lot of sense. I think that just to provide extra certainty, we can put that into the motion to say, you know, have staff report back after 1 year, so we can learn from whatever has happened. I think that's very helpful.
Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. If a request for a proclamation has come forward through to the clerk's office, is council advised of all requests that have come through so that council makes the decision with respect to this? Or will there be some where council will make the decision based on only those brought forward by staff? And I guess the question to that is, what's the potential liability associated with staff not recommending something and then it coming to council and a separate disposition is made?
Mr. Barry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The intention is to have the clerk's office vet the applications on the basis of the criteria and to put the matter forward to CSC for consideration. So it's the council that makes the decision with respect to the disposition of the application. So ultimately it's the council's decision. I believe the intention is that the mayor's signature follow council approval as any other matter that comes to the mayor for execution, bylaws and agreements and things of that nature.
So Chair, through you, for a little further clarification, does that mean, we'll just ask these in tighter questions. Will council see all requests for proclamations, whether recommended by the clerk or not? Please, through you, Chair.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure exactly what the answer to that is. When the report was done, I had identified a couple of tweaks that I thought might be necessary, and that was actually one of the things that I identified, because there isn't a requirement, I believe in the policy as written, for the refusals to come before you. But my recommendation would be, and I think this is the way we would proceed, is that the Corporate Services Committee be notified of all applications, along with the clerk's recommendation as to whether or not those applications would be approved or not. And then the council would make the decision.
So Chair, through you, so that means that this committee will I'll say post-review every review that the clerk has done. In other words, we will have the opportunity to assess each and every individual proclamation request through this committee.
Mr. Cart.
Yes, that would be our intention, Your Worship.
Okay.
Is there, Chair, again?
That's your last question.
Why are we limited to questions
Are we not?
at committee?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we've done an assessment of staff time and to date, but we're going to nail that down over the course of a pilot project. Has there been any consideration of council or committee time on terms of what this process would take?
Mr. Cart.
I'm informed by the deputy clerk that the answer is no, Madam Chair.
So, Chair, perhaps through you to the clerk, when does this become double duty? I appreciate this isn't about any specific issue. This is our proclamations policy, and there was a reason at one point why we got out of that business, but it was probably as a result of some very awkward circumstances and financial considerations. I guess I'm now looking at it from the practical standpoint of the process, Chair, through you. So appreciating that the clerk will require some time, the clerk's office will require time to deal with all proclamation requests, as they do with flag requests now and the like, but through that, and there'll be a time associated with it. Then it comes back to this committee, and we are, am I correct that we're going to see all of the requests for proclamations? And I'm going to presume that'll be considerable based on the prior information that you've given us, but that we're going to see every review that you have done and the rationale behind turning it down or not recommending it proceed, I guess, is really the request. And when it's intended to be supported through the clerk's office, reasons for support. Will we receive all that, if I can ask that through the clerk?
Mr. Cart.
Madam Chair, I think his worship wished to have the answer come from the clerk, but I'll try. As far as the rationale goes, I think our intention is that the review be more objective, and that is there are criteria set out. For example, how does the proposed proclamation advance the objectives of the council strategic plan? And so if the clerk is able to observe on the basis of the application, which is supposed to provide helpful information in that regard, that it does indeed advance the objectives of the strategic plan, then those facts would be noted. I don't think it's the intention of this process and this application for staff to formulate opinions about the merit of particular groups, for example. And going back to an earlier question, which was whether or not the staff would be rigorously vetting these things, I think the intention is to compare the application to the criteria and simply go forward with a report to the council on whether or not it meets those criteria. That's an objective review as opposed to a subjective review. And also, as the mayor had indicated, Madam Chair, there were issues with the previous proclamation policy that resulted in its suspension, cancellation many years ago. We don't have any current experience with the demand for proclamations because we haven't been in the business of granting them. So we don't know how many will be coming forward, and the mayor is correct that these things will come to committee. It will presumably take committee time. But that's one of the things that can be reviewed after the report comes at the end of the first year, whether or not you wish to continue having these matters come forward or whether you wish to choose another route. My feeling at this point is it's better for these proclamations always to be issued by the council because it helps us distinguish between a regular municipal service like issuing a dog tag and something that is a privilege that is conferred by the council itself, which I referred to earlier as a prerogative. So I think those would be my comments, and perhaps the clerk has others from a practical standpoint that she could add to that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other, okay.
Just a final comment. I'll support this to go forward to full council, and I'm certainly very interested to see what colleagues say as we consider this information as well. If I have only a practical issue, is that I'm somewhat nervous of the role of this committee, then repeating the role of the clerk, and then going to council for that same purpose. My sense is there'll be 3 kicks at every proclamation request that comes through. I could be wrong. Maybe the pilot will tell us, but I'll certainly be interested to see what council colleagues say as well.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you to our staff, just so we're transparent about it, what's the approximate cost of 1/2 FTE?
Mr.
Roughly $50,000, Madam Chair.
Councillor Van Holst.
That's fine. I might also ask, so this person who's presently, the person who's going to be doing this, what would they not be doing that they were presently doing now?
Deputy Clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair, the role has not been determined specifically who will be responsible for it at this time.
Any other comments or questions or discussions on this subject? Councillor Morgan.
I just want to make a brief comment. I appreciate Councillor Van Holst's line of questioning, but what I will say to my colleagues is council and committees make work for staff all the time, like all the time. We direct things, we ask for information, we do that sort of things. And so it's not always a question of what other staff member would or wouldn't be doing, but there are requests that come in. Sometimes we give them a lot of requests and we get information back to say things are going to take a little bit longer to get back. So I just don't want it to sound like it's articulated that a specific person is not going to be doing something because a committee or this process asks them to do work. That's not quite how it works. We task staff with items all of the time, and that's a certain function of their job description, is to do the will of council. So I appreciate that Mr. Card said that they're going to figure it out for this year. I trust them to be able to do that, and I don't think that's a consideration to worry about until we get the information back on what the actual consequences of that work was at the end of the first year.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? We're still looking for a seconder. And can you read out the motion, the new motion that's on the table? Oh, Councillor Hopkins wants a second.
Thank you, and through the chair, the motion reads that the proposed bylaw as appended to the staff report dated January 6th, 2020 be introduced at the municipal council meeting to be held on January 14th, 2020 to repeal council policy bylaw number CPOL 115367 as amended by bylaw CPOL 115A418 being issuance of proclamations policy, and replace it with a new council policy entitled issuance of proclamations policy. So that's the new policy that's attached, proposed policy that's attached to the report. It being noted that this policy will be enacted as a pilot project to be reviewed after 1 year of implementation.
So we have a mover, Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer, and a seconder, Councillor Hopkins. And before we call it to question, I would just like to add a few comments on this as well. I think that starting through a process of a pilot project is a good plan to be able to, you know, address some of the issues some of the questions that our colleagues have here. We'll be able to see for 1 year how it's working out, and then go from there, remove it from committee if necessary. I support it as well, and I appreciate all the work that's been put behind this. It's been a long-winded way to get here, and some of the comments that I would like to make are that this is the nature of our job. And this is part of what we do. To some of us here, even though we were elected to represent a large city of 400,000 people, we still are individuals, and sometimes we make opinions based on our individual thoughts, ideas, and things that we believe in. But this was driven by a community. There's a lot of people who wanted to see this, and whether we believe it or not, or we like it or not, this is something that the community wants. Whether we think we should be investing in it or not, the community has asked for it, and I 100% support that we continue to do what the community is asking us to do. And I'd just like to make, to thank staff for all the work that they've put in, because it is something that has had a lot of negative media, and finally we can move forward from this. And as I heard from different colleagues, that this comes up every single council, and our council was no different, and it came up, and we're addressing it, and this is what we got elected to do. So learning throughout, this pilot project is what strengthens us as a council, as we learn how to do our job better, and we continue to improve based on our community needs. So thank you for all the work that's been put in here, and I'm excited to see you move forward. We'll call to question.
Closing the vote, and the motion is passed 5-1.
Now we're going to move to our confidential, deferred matters. We have a a report for the city manager search committee. It's just a public, for public information. Can we get a mover and a seconder for Mayor Holder, seconder Councilor Morgan? I will call it to question. Now we'll move to, oh.
Closing the vote, and the motion is passed 6-0.
Now, we'll move to our confidential portion of the meeting, and we're going to convene in Committee Room 3. Need a mover for Councillor Hopkins, seconder, I'll second. And we'll move to our confidential portion of the meeting, and we will adjourn from there.
Through the chair, I'll note that there is an additional closed session reason on the added agenda. Closing the vote, and the motion's passed 6-0.